So, picking up our story of the Jewish people, after Moses led the Hebrews out of Egypt, they wandered in the wilderness in southern and probably central Southwest Asia uh, for 40 years. And according to the interpretation, they were purifying themselves, getting ready, learning to follow the ethical teachings, commands of God, practicing worshiping their one God alone and not combining other forms of deity worship with this monotheism or monolatrism as we saw before. So Moses is at the brink of entering the Holy Land. The 40 years is about up, and he's looking on a hilltop or mountaintop over the land of Canaan, which is approximates to current day Israeli nation state. And he sees the promised land, but he's told by God they will not be able to reach it himself. However, one of his companions, been his companion and a close confidant for many years, Joshua, once Moses dies, Joshua is commanded to lead his people into the land of Canaan, this land of milk and honey. And even though there's a people already there, this land has been promised them according to their belief in God, and according to the biblical account, there's a great war, battles, shall we say, perhaps more precisely a massacre of the locals um, under the approval of God, according to the Jewish understanding. Um, Now, the archaeological records don't really confirm this. There's probably some battles, but there's probably a peaceful and progressive settling of the Hebrews in this land of Canaan over a many decade period. In fact, there probably wasn't just one exodus of the Jewish people out of Egypt, but there was multiple smaller journeys rather than one large journey of hundreds of thousands of people with Moses. There's probably smaller exoduses or emigrations from Egypt into Canaan over many decades, if not a multiple hundreds of years period of leaving there and entering this land of Canaan, which would become known as their land of the kingdoms of Judah and the land of Israel. Okay, so as they settle there, as they organize themselves in this land, they become 12 different tribes. These tribes are, for the most part, named after the 12 sons of Jacob, that patriarch Jacob. And they're a loose confederation, more or less, cooperate with each other. But eventually, in the 11th century, there's an idea, perhaps inspired by their neighbors, of one king that rules a large kingdom or civilization, that the Jewish people wanted to have a king to lead all 12 tribes as well. So a person named Saul is chosen, and he's anointed by a priest or prophet as the king of the Jews. And it's not known who was Saul exactly and where he came from and why he was important, besides being a Jewish member of one of the tribes. There's various explanations of where he came from, various traditions, both in the Bible and outside of the Bible, and but it's not exactly clear if you take all the stories together why that guy. But there's multiple reasons. Anyway, okay, so Saul rules according to tradition around 20 years or so, but he falls out of favor with God and this prophet, and by committing certain transgressions, and it's decided by the prophet that someone else should be the ruler, and Saul's son-in-law, David, is chosen as this leader, as the leader of the Jewish people. Now, David, besides being a son-in-law, was known to write praises of God and sing praises of God, and the Psalms of the Jewish Bible are attributed to him as being his composition. So David is the guy now. He also was known to have defeated a very large man named Goliath, who was a leading soldier of one of the peoples the Jews were competing with. It was the Philistine people, and so he, in those shorter, is able to defeat him through his cleverness for the most part. Okay, so he becomes kind of a legend hero that way as well, besides being very musical in his praise of God. So David rules. He creates a strong centralized government for the Jewish kingdom, and then once he dies, he passes on his leadership to Solomon, his son Solomon. So Solomon rules in the first half of the 10th century CE, so about 990 to 950, maybe a little shorter than that. And with what Solomon is known for, besides having hundreds of wives, he's known for building the first temple of the Jewish people. So before then, the Ark of the Covenant, okay, so this little thing here is a ark, or say treasure chest, in which the 10 statements in which God wrote with his finger upon stone tablets the teachings or ethics or broad principles in which the Jewish people would live by, right? The 10 Commandments, according to Christians. That this was a mobile sort of Ark of the Covenant, so it moved from place to place. But with Solomon, he received inspiration in which he should build a temple according to certain specific dimensions, and this would be the permanent house of this Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant, besides being literally in which these teachings were written by the finger of God, is also a representation of the Shekinah, the presence of God with the Jewish people. So, for example, when the Jewish people were moving around for 40 years from place to place, whenever they would move, they would parade the Ark of the Covenant and during the daytime in which they walked, there would be a pillar of smoke that would follow them, that would be kind of beaming up from the Ark of the Covenant according to the Bible. And meanwhile, when they walked at night, there would be a pillar of fire that would be connected and beaming up from this Ark of the Covenant. The smoke or fire seemed denoted for them that this wasn't just some sort of stone in which people had engraved certain ideal teachings on, but actually represented the presence of God, their one God who was with them, was guiding them, and would be able to keep his promise of a land just for them. Okay, so what is done at the temple is something called korbanot, or more simply korban. Okay, so these are ritual sacrifices. Let's look at these ritual sacrifices. So you can see here this big barbecue, shall we say, but a large fire in which animals could be roasted and cooked just before the temple. So it wouldn't actually be inside the temple, but just outside the temple. These animals could be cooked as an offering. So these offerings symbolize one's genuineness or sincerity of asking for repentance from God, that I've done these certain misdeeds, I've fallen short of my duties of upholding the 613 commands or laws or mitzvot of God. I've fallen short. So here's my sincere repentance. Here's an animal that I've either bought at the local marketplace or brought from my home, wherever you're farming or a craftsman someplace. I brought this here to Jerusalem, here to this temple, and you'd give it to this person who is either the high priest or representative of the high priest, who would cook it on this sort of altar. Maybe a little bit more respectful way of calling this what was otherwise a barbecue. Cook it on this altar, and that you're offering something of substance, would show your sincerity of your repentance, that I'm sorry for what I did and I'll try to do better the next time and not do that again, even though I'll most likely fall short in some other way at some point. Okay, so these are the burnt offerings. Now the burnt offerings probably come from ancient practices, pre-Judaic practices, in which one's God was seen as one's own Lord, and one would have to offer certain tributes to the king as a sign of one's obeisance or obedience or submission to that Lord or king. Okay, so even the divine king or Lord, right, the God, would similarly be given certain offerings, and it was understood that this invisible spirit or being would actually be sustained, would eat of at least the spiritual essence of this food offering, and would enjoy it and appreciate it, and not just something that would sit there. Now usually the food wouldn't be thrown out, but would eventually be eaten by the people that were joining in together on that day for ritual sacrifice. Okay, so that was Solomon's temple, and here you have two cherubim which protected the Ark of the Covenant, and only the high priest would actually enter in the temple and would perform certain prayers, would light candles, these menorahs, and he was the representative for all the Jewish people before the presence of God, in which the Ark of the Covenant represented. Okay, this big pot of water is where the high priest would have to bathe to purify himself, to be ready to enter the holy temple. These basins, smaller basins of water, was in which the animal itself that was being cut up for roasting, it'd be actually be washed to purify it from the blood as a holy offering to their God.